Hello, I'm going to show you how to do an experiment that shows you just why it is we need to keep good hygiene and wash our hands and ourselves regularly, as well as everything around us. So on us, all around us, everywhere in the world, there are billions of tiny little living things. These tiny things altogether are called microbes, and you get different types. There are bacteria, there are viruses, and there are funguses or fungi, which are types of mold. Some of these are dangerous. We call these germs because they can make us ill, they can make us poorly. Others are actually good for us. Some microbes we need to keep us healthy. They live in our guts and they keep us healthy, or they live on our skin. And others we use to make food. So mushrooms are a type of fungus. They're a giant part of a fungus. Bread is made using yeast, which is another fungus. And yogurt is made using bacteria. So some of these microbes are good for us. Some of them are useful, but some of them are dangerous. And we call those ones germs because they can make us poorly. The problem with all of these things is that they're so tiny, we cannot see them most of the time with our eyes. They're far too small. If you look at your hands, look at them really closely, you might see some spots of dirt if you haven't washed your hands for a while, especially if you've been out playing outside, but you will not be able to see any microbes. But they are there. And the only way to see them is to let them grow, because then they grow and you get, where you had one microbe, you get 2, then you get 4, then you get 8. They keep on doubling until you end up with millions. And when you've got a pile of millions of microbes, then we can see them as a little spot. Now, I'm not going to let those bacteria grow on my hands because that would not be healthy for me. So instead, I'm going to grow it on some bread. Because bread, just like it's really good food for us, is really good food for microbes as well. So they will be able to grow on the bread so that we can then see it. If you want to do this experiment at home, you can do. You'll need a few slices of bread, some bags that you can seal up at the top. So I've got zip seal bags or click seal bags, and a pair of tongs, because some of the bread we're going to have to move without touching. You're also going to need to wash your hands. You'll need some water, some soap, and a towel to dry your hands with. Okay, let's get on to the experiment. So to start with, I want to see how many germs are on my hands when they are dirty. So I haven't washed them for a little while. I've been doing things around the house, around school. So I'm going to see how many germs are on my hands. I need to get the germs from my hands onto a piece of bread. So I'm going to take one piece of bread, and I'm just going to touch it all over with my hands. So that means that any germs that were on my hands are going to spread onto the piece of bread. I don't want to squish the bread. I want to keep it in one piece, but I want to make sure that any germs that are on my hands end up on the bread. Okay, then I'm going to put this bread into the bag that I have labelled dirty hands, because that's what I've touched it with. Seal up the top, and I'm not going to open this bag now. I'm going to leave it closed, but I need to set up another piece of bread to compare it with. So I'm going to go and wash my hands now. I'm going to wash them using soap and water, and I'm going to do it for 20 seconds at least and make sure I wash all parts of my hands. I'll be doing the palms, the backs of my hands, in between my fingers, the backs of the fingers, the ends of the fingers, around my thumbs, and around my wrists. I'm then going to dry them off properly to make sure there's no water left on my hands, and do it with another piece of bread. I will be back in a moment. Okay, I'm back with lovely clean hands. Now, after I cleaned them, I was quite careful not to touch too much else on my way back to show you, because there could be microbes and germs on the door handles. I made sure I dried them on a clean towel, and I'm now going to see how many germs or microbes are left on my hands. So I'm going to do the same experiment again. I'm going to get another different piece of bread. And again, I'm going to touch it all over with my hands. And I'm going to try and touch it just the same amount as I did with the other piece. So I'm going to make sure I don't squish it, but touch all parts of the bread, this time with my clean hands that I've just washed with soap and water. And then I'll pop this into a different bag, a second bag. This one is labelled clean hands. So I've got my 2 bags, one with a piece of bread that I touched with dirty hands, and the other a piece of bread that I touched with clean hands. Now I'm going to leave these somewhere for a few days, maybe a week, somewhere just in a room somewhere a little bit warm but not too hot, and I'm going to see what happens. What do you think will happen to this bread that I've left lying around? Will it be the same for both of them, or will it be a bit different? I'll be back in a few days' time or a week's time to show you what happened. But before I do that, there's one more thing that needs to be set up. What if I find that both of these pieces of bread were covered in bacteria and covered in germs? It could be that there were germs on the bread already. So I'm going to need to set up one more experiment to find out if that happened. So for this last stage, I'm going to set up a control piece of bread. This is to find out what would have happened if I don't touch the bread at all. So this is where I need the tongs. I'm going to find out if there were any germs, any microbes on the bread to start with. So I'm going to this time pick up a piece of bread using my tongs, not touching it with my hands, pop it into the control bag without touching it. There we go. And I'll seal it up, same as the other 2. There we go. So I'm going to leave this bag along with the dirty hands and the clean hands bag. I know that if anything grows on the control piece of bread, it hasn't come from hands, it must have been on the bread already. That might be all right, because as I said, some microbes are healthy, and yeast is even a microbe, a fungus that is used to make bread in the first place. So I know that if anything grows on the control bread, that's okay. I'd expect them to grow on these as well. But if lots grows on the clean hands bread and none grows on the control bread, I know that I haven't cleaned my hands properly. So we'll find out. Come back for the next video to find out what happens. If you like the sound of this experiment, you could do even more. You could find out who in your family has the dirtiest hands or who's best at washing them by getting each person to do their own piece of bread and labelling it in a separate bag. Do you think soap is important when washing your hands? You could try washing your hands without soap and seeing how many germs grow on the bread you touch then. Is it important to dry your hands? You could try washing your hands, but don't dry your hands properly, leave them a bit damp, and see what happens to bread that you touch with slightly damp hands. How many microbes will grow on that? You might be able to think of even more questions that you could answer using this experiment. I would love to hear about them.